everybody, so for today's video we're going to be talking about paperwork. More specifically, it's going to be the paperwork, documents, IDs, things like that you need to get in order to move internationally. So one of the first ones, it's kind of obvious, and that's going to be your passport. And really what it's going to come down to is make sure your passport is going to be valid for as long as possible. You need to make sure you have at least a minimum of 2 years valid time remaining on your passport, and you want to make sure you have plenty of passport stamps back in the immigration section. That way they can add in any stamps, visas, etc. If your passport is going to be expiring in the next couple of years, being able to go to an embassy or consulate here in the Philippines to renew it, it's not all that complicated, but if you are running out of stamp space, you might have to go and have them add in extra pages. It's just a good idea to go ahead and try and get that renewed if you can. Getting a passport renewed is not that expensive when you consider the big scope of getting everything else ready. And if you're wanting to make sure that you have all of your old passport stamps, you're going to be keeping a copy of your old passport. So when you come here, you have your new passport, get all your stampings in it, and if at any time you do want to have your previous stamps showing your travel, you've got your old passport. The other thing that you're going to want to make sure you have is if you plan to do any kind of driving here in the Philippines at any time in the future, you obviously need to have a valid driver's license. And really, it's going to depend on what country you're coming from, but most Western countries, your foreign driver's license is considered valid here for 90 days from the time that you first enter the country. So what that means is, as long as you're within that 90-day period, if you want to go out, rent a car, rent a motorcycle, buy a car, buy a motorcycle, you can drive on your foreign driver's license for up to 90 days from entry. After that, you have to go to the LTO, Land Transportation Office, and you're going to have to get a new driver's license because that's a little bit more of a complex process. I'll probably do a separate video just on a driver's license later, but you want to make sure your driver's license is going to be valid for a while. Now, unlike your passport, where if it does get to the point where it's expiring, you can go to an embassy or consulate to renew it. Your driver's license, you're going to have to go all the way back to your home country to renew that license. So the longer you have remaining valid on your driver's license, the longer you have to use it before you have to go back to your home country to try and get a new one issued out. Eventually, at some point, if you're going to be moving here, at some point you're probably going to try and get a Philippine driver's license just for the convenience factor. The other thing too is a lot of stores and businesses, places you go to, they will not accept a foreign driver's license as valid ID. They only will take a Philippine driver's license or your passport. So it's just convenient having a Philippine driver's license in your wallet. So eventually, when you can get around to it, do that. But at first, you're going to need your foreign driver's license. On a side note to that is typically if your state, country, whatever you're living in has a separate endorsement for motorcycles, that is not always necessary here, because they don't understand what the different endorsements and all that stuff, they don't really cover all of that here. So here, basically, as long as you have a foreign driver's license, you can ride a motorcycle as well. You're also going to want to make sure you have any other important documents. Birth certificates. You're going to want to make sure you have, if you've been married before, you have your marriage certificate. If you have been divorced, make sure you have both marriage and divorce certificates. If you do at any time, plan on having any kind of a church wedding here in the Philippines, you want to make sure you have a copy of your baptismal certificate. You do not need that if you're going to be doing a civil wedding, but if you're going to go through the whole church marriage, you will need a baptismal certificate. If you don't have one, you're going to have to go through the process of getting all of that done while you're here. If you're prior military, make sure you have your DD-214 or your NGB-22. Make sure you've got any other documentation that you need. If you are planning on enrolling here in the VA hospital system here only deals with service-connected issues. It's a good idea to make sure you have copies of any of your medical paperwork. A lot of that the VA can digitally transfer from the US to here. And again, this is only going to apply to US citizens. But there are certain documents from the VA that would be a good idea to bring with you, or at least have digital backups. You're going to want to make sure you've got all that kind of paperwork as well for any children, dependents, wife, anything like that that's coming over here with you. If you have kids, even if they're not with you, you might want to keep their paperwork just in case it's going to be useful. You're going to want to check your banks. Make sure you have current valid bank cards, so ATM cards, debit cards, however it is you plan on spending your money here. Get those ID cards, your ATM cards. You might want to go to a bank and ask them if they're able to issue out a brand new card. Essentially, you're reporting yours as lost or stolen, so they can give you a brand new one. That way it has the longest period possible for its expiration date. If you have immunization records, you might want to bring those with you. A lot of times that might be useful for certain periods, but immunization records are definitely going to be useful at some point. They're not always necessary, but for me personally, it was just a good idea to bring like all of my military and post-military immunization records. Other documentation is just going to be down to you personally. What documents and IDs, things like that, do you have that you think are going to be important? Again, if you're prior U.S. military, we do have branches here for the VFW and the the American Legion. So if you have memberships there, try and bring any documentation, ID cards, anything like that's necessary. If you're into like Mason stuff, I think there are different groups here. So try and bring that documentation with you. And another thing I would recommend is write down somewhere all the phone numbers, addresses, all the contact information for any important contacts back home. If something does happen to your cell phone and you lose that data, at least you've got it written down somewhere for all of your various phone numbers, email addresses, mailing addresses, etc. But that really is what we're talking about here, is just going through and making sure you have all those paperwork available. Make sure you've got all the copies for your passport. When you're here, you're not going to want to drive around, travel around with your physical passport on you. It's too easy for it to get lost or stolen. Most places, you're not even going to really need it. So the best thing to do is make a couple color photocopies of the bio page. That's the first page where it's got your picture, your name, and all that information on it. Make sure it's completely clear and legible, that there's no weird shade or lighting or any bad contrast on the image. And what you can do is that color photocopy of your passport page, fold it up, keep it in your wallet, leave your passport in your hotel, your house, or whatever, somewhere locked up and secured. So when you're going out, if somebody does ask you for ID, you can show them that photocopy of your passport. That, along with your foreign driver's license, whatever else, should be sufficient for ID purposes. And that pretty much is going to cover it. As far as things like your immigration paperwork, visas, that's going to be a separate video. But really think about, if you're going to be moving somewhere, what personal documents do you have that you're really going to need? And that's the end of the video. Thanks.